Hey, it's Jag, and this is part 3 of the Winter Build 2022.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining me for part 3 of the Winter Build 2022. This winter, I am building a Trinity Amps Custom Plexi. In the last episode, I mounted the tube sockets and the front panel controls. Today we will continue along that line and finish mounting all the chassis mounted components. We will be installing terminal strips, grounding lugs, all the back panel controls, and the transformers. So we're going to start with the terminal strips. We need a total of 4 terminal strips. One 5-tag terminal strip. It's called a 5-tag because it has 5 tags, not including the grounds, which the grounds don't have tabs on them on this particular 5-tag. We also will be mounting 3, what they call in the instructions 2 tags, but these are actually what I would call 3 tags. So they have 3 tabs on them. The middle one is a ground, and we won't be using that. We will only be using the tabs on the outsides, which don't go to ground. This chassis and this kit comes in currently 5 different versions that you can build, but it's essentially the same chassis and instructions. So sometimes some of the references are to other kits. That's easy to figure out. So the 5-tag will be mounted just to the left of the power transformer with the tags toward the outside of the chassis. And it will be mounted with 2 number 4 machine screws, lock washers, and a nut. One of the things I like to do when I'm mounting things on the chassis is have consistency on the look of the outside of the cabinet. So if you'll note, all the tube sockets are mounted with machine screws going through to the inside of the chassis. Same thing with the cap can. The screws go to the inside of the chassis. So I have a choice on mounting this tag strip. These holes are tapped, so I could just put the machine screw through from the inside of the chassis to the outside, but then that would leave the top of the screw on the outside of the chassis, and it just, to me, wouldn't look consistent with the rest of the amp. So I'm going to put these number 4 machine screws in through from the top so that it has a consistent look with the rest of the chassis, and then I will use that those lock washers and nut to put the tag in on the other side. Okay, so that's the first one mounted. I might have said that I was going to screw it on this side with a nut and lock washer. Of course, we're using Kep's nuts, which have the lock washer integral to the nut, so there's not 2 separate parts for that. So the next thing we're going to mount is the terminal strip between the 2 output tubes. Sometimes the instructions are not clear, and you have to sort of guess at what to do. That's a pretty common thing on just about anything you build. I'm putting this number 6, like I said, in from the top of the chassis, in through the bottom, and then I will secure this down with a number 6 Kep's nut. Down the road, if I find myself missing a number 6 machine screw and Kep's nut, I'll rummage through what's in here and swap that. You also want to be careful when you're putting in the terminal strips, which way around you put it, with the tag going toward the outside or toward the inside. For example, with this one for the output tubes, I had a choice of putting it so that the terminal strip was on this side of the nut or on this side. It fits in there either way, but if I put it toward the outside of the chassis, I felt that these 2 tabs would be a little too close to some of the pins for the output tubes, so that's why I oriented this in the way that I did. All right, on to the 2 terminal strips that go on V1, and they just mount right to the machine screws that are holding the tube socket in, so all I need is 2 number 4 Kep's nuts. So So that's all 4 of the terminal strips mounted. We will move on to mounting the grounding lugs. There are 3 ground points, 3 common ground points in the chassis. One for the main chassis ground, which goes just on the inside here, and that's only for the ground of the IEC connector. And that's a number 8 lug, and it's mounted with a, again, with a number 8 machine screw and a number 8 Keps nut. All the talk that I have said about not over tightening things always stands. It's a law. It's a rule. But when you're putting these grounding lugs on, you want to make sure that those lugs and the screws or the nuts holding them on are very snug, because that is a ground connection. If that comes loose, there's a safety issue, and even beyond that, a loose ground, if it starts vibrating around, which it will happen when you're playing, can cause noise. It can cause a staticky kind of noise. On a steel chassis, it's not uncommon. I do it myself. I have a very large high wattage soldering iron, and I will also solder the nut to the chassis so that there's a really good solid connection there. On an aluminum chassis, you can't solder aluminum, not with regular solder anyway. So you have to make sure that those are screwed on tightly. The next grounding lug is the power ground. So the power ground for the amp, not the incoming power. And that goes just over to the right of the power transformer. It's 3 grounding lugs mounted and held on with a number 6 machine screw and Keps nut. All right, so time to make a change. For mounting these ground lugs for the power ground point, I need a number 6 machine screw and Keps nut. The only number 6 machine screw and Keps nut that looks like it will work is the one that I used to mount the terminal strip between the output tubes. So I'm going to change what I've done there. I'm going to take that screw and nut out to use for the ground, and I'm going to remount this terminal strip to this number 4 screw on output tube. I think that's V4. Yeah, V4. So those 3 are mounted in here. Like I say, 3 grounding lugs in a sort of a T shape. So we got 1 ground lug on this side toward the can cap, 1 on this side toward the tubes, and this one here, which is toward the power transformer. So last ground point is the preamp grounding point, and that goes in a hole over here on the other side, all the way on the other side of the chassis. You want to keep your preamp ground separate from your power grounds and your power supply grounds, and ideally keep them at the opposite ends of the chassis. So that is 2 grounding lugs, and they mount with a number 4 machine screw and Keps nut. Okay, so that's the preamp ground lugs installed, and they're in a sort of an L shape with 1 grounding lug pointing toward the front of the chassis and the other one pointing in toward the turret board. We now have the back panel components to mount. So that would be the fuse holder, the IEC connector, the impedance switch, the output jacks, and the FAT switch, which is labeled on the back of the chassis as boost. Again, one of the other versions of this amp has a boost switch, but we know that's a FAT switch. With switches, you have a choice of putting them on whatever orientation you want. You could have them go left, right, up, or down. I'm not too picky about that. I'm just going to put the switch in right now in whichever orientation it goes in, and if I want to change it, I can just turn the switch around. Continuing on to the left, we are going to install the speaker jacks. I mount them with the tabs up and on the left and right side. It just makes them easier to access when you're soldering. It doesn't really matter which way you put them in, but if you put it so one tab's down at the bottom and one's at the top, the one on the bottom is going to be hard to reach. Okay, so that's the output jacks mounted. The one toward the center of the chassis looked like it was going to be a little too close to the tabs on V4, so I did twist that just a little bit. I can still reach all of the soldering tabs easily enough, but that's another thing you want to pay attention to when you're putting things in. Your workflow is important, but also it's important not to have one thing shorting to another. So if it looks like something could short to a pin or another part, the chassis or another part of the circuit, you want to make sure you orient those so that can't happen. The next thing to mount is the impedance selector switch. The impedance selector switch has a common output, and then as you switch, the contacts make connections with the 3 different tabs. The mounting washer is keyed. It has this little tab here, and that goes into a hole that is drilled next to the main hole for mounting. So what you want to do is orient that so that that tab goes into that hole. On this amp there are 2 holes drilled, so I could orient this or just shift it a little bit to the left. Wow. Okay, I've just run into another issue. The way the impedance selector switch mounts in here, it's really close to this output tube, and I'm going to shift it. And that will give me plenty of room for the pins on the output tube socket. I may have to take the impedance selector switch out to wire those, but it keeps everything far enough away and we're not looking at anything shorting or risking anything shorting. There's also a benefit. Rather than having it mounted with the out of the switch on the bottom, which would make it difficult to solder to anyway, I can now turn this so that all of the tabs are going to be over the top. It's going to make it a lot easier to solder. So what I do with these keyed washers, if I'm not going to use it, people often say, well, cut that tab off. I don't do that because at some point down the road I may change something and want to have that tab, that locator tab, work. So I just put the washer on backwards with the tab sticking out. It's the same thing with this boost switch that I mounted over here. It has a keyed tab as well, but no accompanying hole for it. So I've got that mounted in. One thing that's always good to check is that it's not going to potentially cause a pin now to short if you put a shielding plate under the chassis. I'm just going to take something flat that I can lay across the chassis and make sure that these pins aren't going to short. I have a piece of aluminum flat bar, and I can put that on and I can slide it, and I've got a good 1/4 of an inch there before it would actually short on anything I put on the bottom, so I'm good with that. So next thing to install will be the knob for the indicator. To make this easy on myself, I'm just going to switch this so that it's pointing to the 8 ohm choice. That way I just put the knob on straight up and down. Tighten up the screw on this so it just starts to snug up, but leaves you a little room to move the knob. So you can point it exactly at the number. On a lot of these knobs, it's a brass set screw in there. Those brass set screws are brittle and they can break. So in another case where you want to tighten something snug, but don't over tighten it. I'll just hold it between 2 fingers and my thumb to turn it, and when I can't turn it any harder, I know it's snug. The IEC connector is mounted with 2 number 4 machine screws. The holes for it are tapped and we don't need any nuts. We want to install it so that the ground tab, that's the middle tab here, is toward the top of the chassis, or because we're working on the chassis upside down, we're going to have that tab on the bottom. The fuse holder has a flat side on it, so also a keyed component, and the hole for it is flat. So you can really only fit this in one way, so you don't have to worry about which way you're orienting things. I will point out, though, that thought was put into how the chassis was cut out, because the tabs you're going to need to solder to are available to you. This is another component with a plastic body, so it would be easy to crack this or strip the threads. So snug. You can't always use a driver to tighten up those nuts, because they won't fit over the component sticks out too far. So you can use a wrench. Somewhere I have some actually thin flat wrenches that actually work to tighten these up. I put them somewhere where I wouldn't lose them, and now I can't remember where I put them, so I've lost them. So as long as you're careful, you can use a pair of pliers to tighten that up. So that's all of the back panel components installed. Nothing is loose or moving. The switches both work fine. We're on to mounting the transformers now. In the instructions, the next step would be to wire the heater pins on the tube sockets and then mount the transformers. I'm just reversing that. I'm going to mount the transformers now, and then when I get to soldering, I can kind of do that all as one job. To me, it makes more sense that way. I pointed this out in the unboxing, and I don't know why. I just get a real kick out of this, that they have their logo now printed on the transformer. I think that's kind of cool. I like it. These transformers are custom wound for Trinity, so it's their design, so it should have their name on it. It's going to go in the chassis down like this, so the wires will go through this cutout in the chassis. All of the mains input wires will be toward the front of the chassis. You can mount the transformer so it's mounted flush to the chassis if you take the nuts off on the bottom of the transformer, and then you just use the nuts that mount it to the chassis underneath to tighten that up. It just kind of gives a cleaner look. I don't know, I like the look of it. You can leave those factory nuts on there as well, and your transformer will just stand up a little bit off the chassis. The transformer is mounted to the chassis using four number 8 Keps nuts. Those are screwed on here all the way around. The output transformer is also mounted using 2 number 8 machine screws with a number 8 Keps nuts. You mount it with the primaries, that is the blue and brown wires and the red wire, toward the power transformer, and the secondaries, the orange, yellow, green, and black wires, are toward the other side of the chassis, or away from the power transformer. Those will be going to the selector switch. That's the mounting of the transformers. I'm sorry I didn't film that and show it, but I wanted to make sure I had some time to cover a few things. So anytime you have 2, 3, 4 more wires going to the same place, they should be twisted together just to help shield against noise. So I have done that on the power transformer and on the output transformer. So the wires feeding power into the transformer, there's no need to twist or braid those together because they all will be going to different places. So if I can, I may twist them. The 2 yellow wires will be going to the rectifier. The white wire will be going off and connecting as part of the power supply. Those 3 wires don't need to be twisted either. But your heater supply wires there are three. There are two green wires and a green yellow wire, a green wire with a yellow stripe. Twist the two green wires together because they will go off to supply power to your heaters. You don't need to twist the green yellow wire in there because that just goes off to ground. It's a center tap. On the output transformer, we want to take the primaries, the brown and blue wires, and twist them together. Those are going to go to one each to the plates of the output tubes. There's also a red wire that will carry the B plus voltage. You twist the brown and blue wires together, and they go through this grommet toward the power transformer along with the red wire. Over here, the secondaries, which are going to feed the selector switch and then the output jacks, there are 4 wires there. So when you have 2 wires, you twist them together tightly. Some people, I'm going to address one issue here. Some people say, well, put those 2 wires in a drill and just spin them up. That's fine. Be careful doing that. I don't do it. I just sort of like doing it by hand. If you do it with a drill, be careful you don't spin it super fast. I have seen people twist those wires right off a transformer, and a transformer is one of the most expensive parts to replace in an amp. So go slow and be careful. You want it twisted tightly, but you don't want to twist them right off. The other thing about doing that, when you do it with a drill, the way the wires are close together, they kind of don't look so neat when they're twisted unless you're really careful about how you do it. When you twist it by hand, you take the wires and I pull them like this, and it makes a very even looking twist. I don't know if you can see that there. So it looks nice. There's no reason for the inside of your amp not to look nice. Techs are the only people who are ever going to see it. But when they see that, that's a sign of quality. It's a sign of somebody who took their time to do the job and do it well. So that's when you're twisting 2 wires. If you've got 3 wires that are going together, just braid them together. If you've got more than 3, I have 4 here that are the secondaries from the output transformer. You plate them, which is just another way of saying that you're braiding more than 3. What I do is this plate is called a flat braid. I was going to show it, but I don't think I have enough time. But by doing this flat braid, the wires are all braided together or plated together, and they lie a little flatter. As I say, these secondaries, these wires are going to go up to the impedance selector. I can lie this flat against the chassis, run it over between the output tubes, and then up to where it's going to go on the selector switch. So it not only serves the function of the noise shielding, it also helps these wires lie flatter against the chassis. And that's another thing. When you run these wires, you want to run them against the chassis. You will see that when I do the heater wiring. When I run all these wires, I'll cover that a little bit. One other thing I want to say, and then we're going to wrap up this video for today. The output transformer has 8K primaries and 5K primaries. The 8K primaries are for EL84 output tubes, which could go in this kit. They go in several of the versions of this kit. The 8K primaries are also the ones you use for 6v6s. There's also 5K primary on here that we aren't going to use. So those have been twisted and tie wrapped down, shrink wrapped on the end, and they're just tucked under on the outside of the chassis, just under this edge of the output transformer, because we won't be using them. So there you have it. Today we installed the 4 terminal strips. We've installed all of our grounding lugs. We installed the back panel components, the transformers, and we have twisted, braided, or plated all the wires that need to be twisted, braided, or plated. We're ready to go on to the next step, which will involve the soldering iron. Wire up the heater wires to the tubes, which was a step I skipped over. We'll also wire the power transformer, and we're going to check the power supply, make sure everything's working there. If there's time, I may start on the turret board. So that will be in the next video. We're probably somewhere between a third and halfway done. So very good. Again, as I said, when you get the front panel components mounted in the faceplate, you know you're building an amp. From the outside, this looks like a completed amp, an amp that's ready to go. Just put tubes in and you fire it. It's not. We haven't done anything inside. But this is what the amp is going to look like when it's finished. So thanks for joining me today. This is the end of part 3 of the Winter 2022 build, the Trinity Amps Custom Plexi. I've said it before, I am really looking forward to getting this one done and hearing it. Please like and subscribe, comment. All of those things help my videos get viewed by a wider audience, and I would really appreciate that. I'd like to grow the channel. I do respond to comments. As always, the links for my band One Soul Thrust are in the description below. Until the next video, thanks for watching, and we'll see you.